Thanks, everyone, for joining us on the road to HR Tech. I am your MC, Jess Von Bank. I have been having an absolute ball. I can't believe this is like the 11th episode or something we've done leading up to HR Tech, the conference in Vegas, which is now only a couple of weeks out. So we're sort of closing in on this series we've done around the talent life cycle, starting at the top of the funnel with recruitment marketing, moving through candidate management, and ending with employee engagement. But I have to say a few of our topics, including this one around onboarding, really sort of span a couple of segments, specifically candidate management and employee engagement, because today we're talking about onboarding for employee engagement, the correct way to get that new talent that you've worked so hard to win into your organization and productive and happy and engaged for the long haul. So of course I could have nobody else to cover this topic with me other than my friend and colleague, Christine Marino. Christine, will you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, first of all, for having me. Yes, I am Christine Marino. I'm the CRO for Clipboarding. Been in the HCM space for 22 years, and absolutely just as a friend and a colleague of hers as well, because we've known each other for years and years in other roles. I love what I do right now just because when you think about the overall impact that onboarding has on the entire life cycle to a productive and engaged employee, it truly makes a difference, and it truly is the foundation of everything that goes into creating a successful, productive employee. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I love that you said that, because I was thinking about this topic and in all of the topics I've covered on the road to HR Tech, and I feel like I've covered some interesting stuff, but I've covered some no-brainers, I feel like, and I admit, I mean, I'll be the first to admit, I'm not exactly hard to sell on a couple of the topics, like the power of employee advocacy on behalf of your employer brand, or this whole concept we're hearing a lot about around delivering a really personalized, consumer-like candidate experience that most closely mimics what we experience in our everyday lives. So I know I'm not hard to sell on a couple of these topics. I've seen them in action. I can tell ROI stories about them for days. But when I dug into this topic, the ROI around onboarding might be the most extreme. In fact, I was thinking about this last night. It's not so much an ROI story. I almost think of it as the cost of doing nothing. So like the real cost of doing nothing, and I can't wait to get to that. But before we get to that, I think we have to paint a picture a little bit. Help us understand the picture. What are we seeing for engagement these days in the average American workforce?
I'm happy to do that, although the picture isn't a very pretty one. And when you talk about the cost of doing nothing, I like how you frame that up, because I look at that as the status quo. And nothing in my life is the status quo ever acceptable. And looking at onboarding and the impact that it has on the overall success of a new hire, accepting the status quo, you can't do that. The stats, just to help you frame up the landscape, if you would, are staggering. 4% of employees don't even show up on day one. Like, wow. Don't even walk through the door on day one. So you've gone through the effort, you've invested the time, they don't even show up. 20% of new hires quit within the first 45 days. So think about the time and the resources that you invest in training and development and everything else. And what I love about when I look at the 20% of employees don't even show up, it's like the entire interview process, they're constantly putting on, you know, their best game face. They're saying all the right things. They're making sure that they're early, so on and so forth. And the second the identification, the decision to hire, the second you make that offer to them, it kind of flips. There's a little bit of a role reversal, because now they are now scrutinizing everything that we say or do as a hiring manager, or don't say or do. And that's what impacts whether or not they make the decision to stay within the first 45 days. And we can take this full circle. 90% of employees decide whether to stay with that organization within the first 6 months. So the impact, you know, it's not just looking at this on a whole. We're looking at, 4% don't show up on day one, 20% are making the decision within 45 days. You've got 90% being represented in the first 6 months. And all of these numbers roll into the fact that $450 to $550 billion is the number that's being recognized in lost productivity every single year.
That is absolutely staggering. It's absolutely staggering. And as a former recruiter, I have to tell you, especially as a technologist delivering solutions to help employers attract, engage, nurture, and ultimately hire incredible talent, And then as a former recruiter whose job this was to do, that's almost like a punch to the gut. Like, we work so hard and we put together these beautiful strategies and we execute them, we think, well, and then you add the cost per hire, and there's lots of data, lots of stats out there we could use, but for the sake of making the point, let's use Josh Burson's data from a few years back. Let's say an average cost per external hire is $4,000. So the fact that, all those stats that you just gave me, some of them don't even show up. A lot of them aren't retained over the long haul. 90% of them are deciding within the first short span of their employment whether or not they're going to stick around for the long haul. That's like a massive roll of the dice that we're taking after we've worked so hard to attract and hire them, and then we just sort of hope for the best. We might as well be opening the backfill rack in so many of the cases. And I think this is a really important picture to paint, because to me, when you think about competitive edge in the war for talent, it might not be the war to hire and attract the best fresh new talent every single time over and over and over, but rather onboarding and retaining and keeping the talent that you've already hired. Maybe that's the true competitive edge.
Absolutely, because when you really look at it, it's anything less than 100% productivity as a new hire costs an organization money. So if you accept the, let's do nothing, what is the cost of doing nothing, or that status quo somehow is even acceptable, anything less than 100% of productivity, it's costing your organization real dollars.
Not only that, if I'm an employee and I'm at less than 100% productivity, if I'm a disengaged employee, a bad apple, so to speak, I'm affecting others. I'm draining productivity from others. So the cost really multiplies over time. So onboarding for employee engagement, the idea is to get an employee to productivity as quickly as possible, but also to engage them, to keep them engaged and invested for the long haul. So what does an engaged employee look like exactly?
That's a great question, Jess, because when you look at traditional onboarding from years and years ago and what used to be acceptable, right? So you show up on day one and you knew you were going to spend 4 hours filling out, tons and tons of paperwork and signing your name. Hopefully someone is going to come by and say hello, but you had no idea what you were walking into. You probably packed a bag lunch because you didn't want to start. You certainly didn't know who you would go out to lunch with. But that's not the world that we live in anymore. So when you talk about how an engaged, or what does an engaged employee look like today, now more than ever, employees need to feel connected. So they need to feel like you care about them and that they matter and that what they do makes a difference, right? So that's dramatically different than what we're talking about of onboarding or traditional onboarding in the past, because an engaged employee is a happy one. They understand what the expectations are of them. They're aligned with the vision of your company. And I think what's interesting is these are all those touchy-feely things that make people uncomfortable, right? It's so much easier if I'm robotic and just come in on day one and I do this and I sign off on my, security exam, so on and so forth. Someone tells me where the bathroom is. That's so much easier than worrying about, well, how do you feel? Do you have everything you need? Well, geez, maybe you don't want to sit alone at lunch. Maybe I should invite you to lunch, which is just, it's dramatically different. But when those feelings are present, that's ultimately what delivers, that's when you achieve this engaged, high-performing, someone who's putting out quality work, that's interested in their own advancement and development within your organization. You have true ambassadors of your brand, right? They train and model the best practices to others. So now people want to be like them. You talk about you can't have that negative individual within an organization because it does. A bad apple, I think is what you said. It spreads throughout the organization. When you bring in that positivity and create that environment where someone really feels like they're connected and they make a difference, that exudes. People want to get on that bandwagon. I'm very, very passionate about this, but the net when you look at it is once you achieve an engaged employee, they're more likely to stay. So then we don't have to go through that entire recruitment process again that we just kind of briefly talked through and what it takes to find that talent and the impact it has should you lose them in a short amount of time.
So I hear this feedback all the time when I'm out on the road, hear various speakers or read content. We talk a lot about it for millennials and the Gen Z employee, but it's not exclusive to them. And you just said it. An engaged employee is somebody who understands what the bigger picture is and what the contribution they're making to the organization is for, and that their work matters, and they need to feel connected to your culture, to their peers, and connected and invested in the work that they're doing. So that's engaged employee, and we do need to understand that and recognize that, or we're going to keep throwing away money. But how can onboarding help create that, help drive engagement?
Onboarding is the critical foundation to everything that you just said. You know, this is the moment of truth. You and I have talked about that before. This is really the moment of truth of whether or not your organization is going to have the opportunity to recognize the investment of that new hire, or if you're going to go back to the drawing board and start all over again. So once the decision to hire is made, you know, organizations need to immediately engage with that, you know, now new hire, right? So they used to be in the recruiting process, and you have to share the company purpose. You have to align them with the values. You know, maybe you have a mentor program, or start to connect them with the teammates. You know, we ask fun facts about the individual. So when you actually show up on day one, it's not the typical, so Jess, where did you come from? Where'd you work before here? You know, but rather you're having some personable and impactful conversations. You can't overlook the fact that the tools to be productive, right? So the tools that they need to ultimately be successful in their job, you know, do you need a laptop? Do you want a PC? Do you want a Mac? What do you want on your business cards? How about making sure that the security badge that you need to access the bathrooms or even just the building you have? The whole idea is when you walk in on day one, you're showing this individual that A, we want you here, B, we're prepared for you to be here, and by the way, you have all the tools you need to be successful and productive as quickly as possible. So it's critical, because when you do these, you minimize the anxiety an individual feels when joining an organization. I don't know if you know this, but they actually, depending upon what stat you look at, they rank it as 3 or 5. But starting a new job is rated in the top 5 anxieties an individual will experience as they go through life. So anything that you can do to ultimately minimize the anxiety that they're experiencing and help them feel connected immediately dramatically impacts the success and the productivity that you're going to get out of them. You know, I like to say, however you look at it, let me put it this way. The reality is the function of recruiting is just that. It's to recruit. So organizations will fail every single time if they expect a recruiter to onboard successfully, if their success is measured on recruiting. I hope that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So a recruiter's success is measured obviously on the talent they bring through the door. And if that's what I'm measured on, you can't expect that role to continue through the transition process of having the talent go from a candidate to a new hire. But you need to ensure that there is a smooth transition from recruiting to the hiring manager, right? It's not just a Hail Mary, I hope you show up on day one. You need to have a standardized process in place that makes that transition from recruiting to the hiring manager extremely smooth. And once you've done this, what I like to call strategic onboarding, you get that outcome that provides an awesome experience for the candidate while still creating internal scalable processes.
Which creates a better experience for the hiring manager. I'm sure most HR pros or hiring managers recognize and wish they could do a better job of this. And so the fact that they can engage and get, you know, that relationship going as quickly as possible and a little bit more easily probably is a big win for them as well. And it creates some consistency. Mm-hmm. You have somebody that does it really well and somebody who does it not at all.
Absolutely.
I think that's a great point. And so when you think about implementing a strategy, a specific strategic thinking program around onboarding, I tie everything back to measurement. Mm-hmm. I was trained this way. I was trained very well. And so what can I measure? What should I be looking for to know that I'm doing it right and that it's producing the outcomes I'm hoping for?
So to tie it back to the stat that we shared earlier, like to measure your success, you're obviously going to impact that 20% of new hire turnover in the first 45 days. So that would be one very deliberate measurable. You'll be able to benefit with an 18% increase in performance and productivity. So you'll have that highly productive, more engaged employee that's ultimately contributing to that bottom line or the overall success of the organization that much faster. You'll see a 50% increase in brand loyalty. So imagine having your new hires out there being ambassadors of your brand. So I laugh about this, but you could actually make the argument that onboarding actually impacts recruiting. Mm-hmm. Because if you have someone coming through the door, how great is it to be able to say, well, why don't you talk to these three new hires, you know, one that's been here for 30 days, 90 days, 180 days, and to have them all be touting the same story that, you know, this is such a great place to work. And, you know, the fact that they empowered me, they showed me, helped me understand what was expected of me. They talked about my career path. They aligned me with the culture and the visions of the organization. That's huge. That's huge, because when you have that, you've ultimately really achieved success in a highly productive, engaged employee, which means a longer tenured employee.
You know, we collectively in the industry, we use the parallel all the time between recruiting and dating. So when you think about it, the courtship of candidates, they've just made a commitment to you. They're on a high because you've been wooing them for weeks, and they've just, you know, received their offer letter and told all their family and friends. They're so excited, and they're finally here. The big commitment ceremony or whatever. I've always said that is the time to grab them. For employer referrals, they're still in the honeymoon phase. They have drank the Kool-Aid, and they are so excited to be here. It's the time to grab them for employer referrals. It's the time to grab them for brand ambassadorship, as you said. Let them spread the good word through their networks. So absolutely, onboarding has an impact on recruiting.
But let's just kind of reverse engineer that, if you would, because I completely agree with you. But if you don't do those things, you talk about the courtship and the dating stage, right? So I always use the analogy, because I use the same scenario. Mm-hmm. You can't take off the stilettos and the makeup on your second date, right? It's like, whoa, wait a second, where'd your eyelashes go? So if all of a sudden the decision to hire is made and I've accepted the offer, and that's it, you just kind of say, I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Right.
You know, I have to go back to my current employer in a lot of scenarios, and I have to put in my 2 weks notice. Now, all of a sudden you tell me that you're going to reach out to me within 48 hours to, you know, start my paperwork. Okay, it's the necessary evil, right? I want to get paid, and there's some regulatory things that you need to get from me. But you don't reach out to me in 2 days. And I'm sitting there going, well, wait a second. You know, up until this point, you've done everything spot on. You were completely on time. You were very, very proactive. I said yes, and now there's nothing. And everything that you promised me throughout the entire recruiting process starts to unravel a little bit. And this is what I was talking about, where there's that switch. Like once that decision to hire is made, it flips around. And now as the new hire is starting to scrutinize everything you say or do or don't say or do to make that decision. Did I do the right thing? Well, wait a second, maybe I don't want to put in my 2 weeks. And those are the types of attributes that really impact the stats if onboarding is not done right. Onboarding done right? Absolutely. You need to get those referrals, and you need to go out there and say, who do you know? You know, let's recruit the rest of your friends. But if you don't, the impact is pretty dramatic.
I've always said employer brand is a promise. It's a promise. It's a representation, and it's a promise where onboarding and employee experience, once I've hired you, is delivering on that promise. And I hope it's true, you know, as the employer, as the new hire. That's great. Christine, these stats are amazing. You've got tons of great content on your site, which I enjoyed perusing. I stole some of it to help paint the picture for this topic in my blog post. Thank you for breaking this down for me. As I've said, this is the road to HR Tech, to the actual conference itself. It's happening in Vegas in a couple of weeks. So we're doing something cool, my team and Symphony Talent, to promote the Women in Technology sort of conference sub-theme that they're doing. We're making a donation to Girls Who Code, obviously something I'm super passionate about as a woman in tech and as a STEM advocate and mom of 3 girls. So I'm kind of excited to do a little bit of a campaign around that theme. And it's Find Jess, and I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. Find Jess at HR Tech, as the road to HR Tech arrives in Vegas, and tell me one thing you'd fix about HR technology. And everybody who comes and finds me and has that conversation with me, I'll keep track. You'll increase our donation, our contribution to Girls Who Code. So it's a little bit of a contest, and I'm actually just really interested in hearing what people have to say around that topic. So that's how I'll close with you. What is one thing that you would fix about technology landscape of HR technology?
Does this count for my donation?
I'll count it, absolutely. there goes this contribution.
I love what you guys are doing, because it's different. It makes me think of like, where's Waldo?
Yeah.
But so what is one thing I would like to change in HR Tech? You know, when you think about a top initiative within most organizations that I speak to, it's always about HCM, right? It's human capital management. And when I think about human capital management, I feel very passionate and strong about, as we continue to develop these technologies and leverage different solutions to ultimately positively impact human capital management, don't forget the fact that there's people involved. You can never 100% eliminate the individual that's at some point involved in the process. I don't care how awesome you are at refining and defining internal processes. Maybe you have this amazing onboarding technology component that makes everything turnkey. At the end of it, the individual that's being impacted is a human being.
That's so true. You can't patch everything with technology. We're real, live human beings with emotions and home lives and all of that. That's a fantastic point to make as we head into HR Tech. So I'm super excited to see you there. What our audience may not realize, by the way, is that I finally took the road to HR Tech on site. I'm actually sitting here with you in your clipboarding offices, which is awesome. But I'm excited to see you in Vegas as well. I know clipboarding will have a presence there. What's your plan? How should people find you, and what are you up to at HR Tech?
Absolutely. We will have a booth. Would love, obviously, for you to come up and say hello. We'd love the opportunity to meet you. There's about 4 of us that will be walking the floor, and I can promise we'll be reaching out to you if you don't come to us. So looking forward to meeting everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the road to HR Tech. The countdown continues. We're almost to the show itself, so I've got a couple of surprises up my sleeve I hope to close out the series with. Otherwise, we'll see everybody at HR Tech in Vegas.
Thanks, Jess.
Thanks, Christine.